welcome you to this session of Through the Arsenal Gates. This is an opportunity for you to learn about people who have made history, are making history, and will make history. Today's guest is a little unusual in terms of how I met him. I'm a volunteer at Oakwood Hospital. You know, they call me in for surgery every now and then. And I met this fellow who said, after a long conversation, he said, "You got to meet this friend of mine, Jimmy Tuman." So I want you to think about two things, about what your life is all about and how you can volunteer to make the community a better place. Cornwall Hospital is a great place for you to begin, or you might want to do some volunteer work at the museum, the Dearborn Historical Museum. So let's get on with this wonderful interview. Jimmy, tell us where you were born.
I was born in Manhattan in New York City.
And did you grow up in New York?
I was born there and grew up there and went to school there and then came into Michigan. So
how did you end up in Michigan?
I actually wanted to play sports, and my mother and father were going through a really bad divorce, and I didn't want to be in the middle of it, and I wanted to be relatively far away. So I got some offers to play sports in California. And, I thought I would take a shot at Michigan State because of their big sports program. And I got there and discovered that, as good as I was playing football in high school, I couldn't compete with the sizes of, the people at Michigan State. So.
Okay, so you tried out for Michigan State football team.
Yes.
So did you graduate from Michigan State?
I did. I graduated and then received the highest honor that they give for service.
Very good. Very good. Now, you currently live in the metropolitan Detroit area?
We go back and forth from Royal Oak to Western Michigan. My wife, we have a house in Western Michigan, and she has, programs here that she deals with. But I have my main programs. I have my youth charity that is in its 36th year, and we've served, more than 500,000 families, indigent families. And we're now in the middle of a big problem since yesterday where, Southwest Detroit was flooded big time. And what happened was people lost everything. And we've stepped up and we're going to, get, things for infants and a lot of other stuff. And I use the charity for these types of scenarios, for natural disasters, but our big program that goes all over the world is Christmas morning. And we've been doing that a long time. And we have upwards of 1,500 people that come down every Christmas morning, and they deliver to families who don't know we're coming. And we have people that come from all over the United States and from Asia and from Europe, and they just want to experience what it's like on Christmas to serve and to be in that service mindset. And it's beautiful. I mean, I'm very grateful that this thing has continued to grow and keep its commitment to these very poor families.
Let's back up a little bit here. When you were a young person, who was the most significant person in your life?
The most significant person in my life, and I want to kind of have your listeners understand this. I traveled the world and people would show up, Glenn, in without warning, and make a difference in my life, even for an hour. And I'll give you an example of this. I was in Holland. I was 18 years old. I was in Holland. I was working on a freighter, the Black.
But you don't mean Holland, Michigan.
No, not Holland, Michigan. Yes, that's true. So I took a train to Amsterdam, and I got off the train, and there was a car sitting in front of, the train station. And I walked over and I asked this man, I said, I had a slip of paper and I was looking for a friend of mine who lived in Delft, and where they make the china. And I asked this man, do you know where this is? And he said, no. He said, but get in the car and, I'll see if we can find it. Well, Glenn, he drove for probably an hour and a half or more looking for this, particular, place. And finally we get to it. And I grab my backpack from the back seat and I come around to the driver's seat and I lean in and I said, I can't thank you enough. You went the extra mile. I'm so appreciative of what you did for me. And he said something to me that here at 18 years old, I have lived out in the rest of my life. And he said to me, he said, Jimmy, he said, isn't this what it's all about? Aren't we on this earth to help each other? And that was the teacher moment that I learned. And I had dozens of people like that.
Very good. Now, when you were a young person, did you work?
I did. I went to, I came out of New York City, which, was, a challenge. You grew up very fast. And my family moved to Scarsdale, New York, in Westchester County, which at that time and still is today, the richest high school in the country. And I saw all kinds of wealth in so many different levels. And it was really difficult for me to deal with because of this, how wealth affected people's lives and how they were able in some way, shape, or form to make it a huge part of their life. But I didn't see any love. And I went to work delivering mail at Christmas time from October to Christmas. And I would go home with my mailman, who basically, lived in Left Rack City. It was a low income, place. And we went and we go on the elevator, and we came off the elevator, and there'd always be that stench of urine and things that people were, that the people didn't take care of the building. But anyway, he would go and he would put the key in the door, Glenn, and he would open up the door, and he had 6 children in a 2-bedroom apartment, and they would scream out, "Daddy's here." And they would jump on top of him and they would roll around on the floor. It was the first time in my life I saw love. And I looked for that type of love for the rest of my life.
Very good. Jimmy, what are your values?
My values are service first. I want to make a difference. When I was 10 years old, I in my head, I wanted to move the grain of sand a little bit for the time that I'm on this earth. And I have worked really hard to take groups and put them all together and help them support each other and help them celebrate differences in each other. And I've had some great success in doing that. And so my program, has Christians, Jews, and Muslims, and now Hindus and Yemen and all kinds of groups. And they all come together and they work together to serve the poor. And it is a melting pot of being able to do this. And I'm so grateful that I have had the opportunity to build this charity, which is 36 years old.
What is your best characteristic, Jimmy?
My best characteristic is I take a page out of Woody Allen, which Woody Allen says, 80% of life is showing up. That's the magic that I have. And I wrote a book about that. But I've been to every major event in the world. I don't buy tickets. I show up and magic just happens that way. But these days, probably the best characteristic that I feel is I learned to do task completion. I learned to be able to, when I had a dream or an idea or a concept, because I'm creative all the time, my mind never stops. What I would do is I couldn't figure out how to make it completion. And I started a lot of programs in my early days and stopped because I couldn't do it. Now I go to the finish line. I make this completion. I make this commitment so that I can keep my momentum going.
Very good. Tell us about some of the jobs you've had along the way.
The crazier jobs, and in my 20s and 30s, I was really struggling to find what my purpose was. And so some of the craziest jobs, I spent a year with the Shrine Circus as a circus clown. I was a rodeo rider with the Longhorn Rodeo. I was a roadie for Journey. I was a chauffeur for Peter, Paul, and Mary. I worked on a congressional staff, and you name it, every type of craziness that I could experience, I wanted to do. One of my biggest challenges was finding my purpose and getting in touch with what my purpose was on this earth, because I had no clue. And I was just bouncing around from one thing to another. And, it was a challenge, and I felt that I wasn't getting any closer, but I kept bouncing. And I know that there are a lot of people out there, because I work with, young people, for the last 50 years. And I know that they're struggling.
Now, I read a good quote recently, and it said the two most important days in our lives, number one, the day we were born, and the second, the day we realized why we were born. Anyhow, little tidbit there. Now, how old are you, Jimmy? 82, 83?
I just turned 83, and I have challenges that I don't talk about all the time. But back in 2018, I woke up in the morning, Glenn, and I was totally blind and with no warning. And I was working on a legacy piece the day before in terms of filming, and all of a sudden I'm blind. And, my whole world is upside down. And I just, felt like, my life was over as I knew it. And I went into a depression. And what got me out of the depression was I'm a goals person. And I write out my goals, and I go after my goals with, a furious, energy. And friends started reading the list of my goals, which is up in the 300s of things I've experienced in my life. And I could close my eyes, Glenn, and I was there. I was at these things. I mean, I've been to every major event, and when they would mention a Super Bowl, or, I've been to 16 Super Bowls. When they would mention a Super Bowl, I could close my eyes and then feel like I was there. And in that, I was able to be grateful. And in this gratefulness, I said, I'm not giving up. I'm going to fight, for my life. And I'm going to fight. And since then, my wife and I have written 4 books together. You know about the 2 songs. I've expanded my charity. I've created a program in Highland for, a kindness where the whole community has come together. I still work on teen suicide prevention every day because I get calls every day from all over the country. And I equally important is I work in terms of the mass shootings that we're dealing with. When I came back from Columbine, a reporter asked me, Jim, is this going to be a one and done? And I said, no, this is going to be an onslaught. It's going to be a continuum. And the reason I knew that, Glenn, was because the 2 kids that shot up the school were loners. They were isolated in school. Their voice didn't count, and they wanted to have their voice count. And these days, the way that, kids are operating in terms of, making their voice count is to shoot up a school. So I want to curb a lot of this. I have some solutions. I have some solutions in my podcast that I want people to listen to. So that, run my life every day, but I get up with that sense of energy and purpose that I still have something in the tank.
Now you've written 2 songs. At what age were you when you wrote your first song?
A year ago, when I was 82, I wrote "Don't Say Goodbye, Say I Love You," and that particular song was, in my head, and I wrote it in 15 minutes. And what was amazing to me is I wrote it for a special purpose. I was watching how COVID affected, the world. And what I realized was that friends and family couldn't get in to say goodbye to and to tell people that they love them because of the transmission. So they couldn't get in there. So many people died alone and died without the love of the family. So I wanted that to be an anthem for people to really say I love you and really be able to say it before the time comes a person passes on.
Now, what was the second song?
Second song is Fight for Your Dreams. And it was all about the fact that we all have these dreams. We all have these things we want to do in our head, and they spin around. And so often people don't fulfill those dreams. And what was said, so many times to me, that at the end of our lives, we will not, regret any of the things that we did. We'll regret the things that we didn't do.
Absolutely. Now, you have been defeated in Congress and in the Michigan legislature. Tell us about that.
I have been very fortunate in a humble way to get the highest honor at every phase of my life, from my high school, to Michigan State, to my national fraternity, to be one of the Detroit News Michiganians of the Year, to being honored, 3 times on the floor of Congress. I mean, my list goes on, and, I've been honored by presidents and senators and everything, and world leaders. And it's very touching to me. But what is really more important in terms of these awards is the fact that it motivates me to keep going, not to stop because I get an award, because that would be insignificant to me, but to keep going and to keep, moving the needle forward.
Very good. Now you have podcasts. Tell our audience about them.
A year and a half ago, didn't know much about podcasts, and I started to learn about it. And I started this podcast called Compassion Through Kindness. And we're up to, I think it's 78 sessions now from all over the country. And it's on solution-based, focus, because I feel like instead of people talking about their problems, let's figure a way how to be able to create solutions. And the podcast has all of these in so many different ways. Whether, I did one with my cousin from California, San Luis Obispo, and he was an All-American football player, All-American baseball player. But what was really interesting to me was he had 5 moments in his life that changed his life. And one of the moments was he was a student of John Wooden, who basically, holds the record for most national titles in basketball of any other coach, and that record probably will never be broken. Anyway, one day he raised his hand and he says, Dr. Wooden, he said, why don't you talk more about winning? And Dr. Wooden said, winning is overrated. If you're going to compete, the most important gift you can give yourself is character. And I have embraced that so many times in my messages. I've spoken to 2 million, students in more than 2,000 schools in every state and 11 foreign countries. And so much of what I have learned, I try and pass on to them. And equally important, I don't talk about necessarily my achievements. I talk about some of my, circumstances where my problems were so overwhelming, because I wanted people to understand that I wanted to be one of them. I wanted to be one of the kids. I wanted to feel that commitment. And if you ever get a chance to watch, because I have hundreds of talks on my Facebook page and also my website, I developed the ability, Glenn, to get kids to open up and share their feelings. And kids would come up. I would ask kids, have you ever had anybody in your life that's been there in your life, that's been there when you needed them and has saved your life? And I wait for the first person to come up to the mic and share that feeling. And it's like, sometimes it's agony, because that first person could be minutes and you're standing there in silence and people are coughing and they're looking around and everything. But I've never had a school in 2,000 schools that I've done where kids didn't come up to the mic. And once they come up to the mic, hundreds of kids get online to share their pain. My longest on record, program was at Grosse Pointe North High School, of all places. It started out at 8 o'clock in the morning, and at 7:30 that night, 11 and a half hours, 2/3 of the school was still there talking about their pain and their issues and their need for their parents. to accept them as they are, and all of these particular problems that people, were dealing with.
Now, what do you want people to say about you when you pass to the next life?
I want people to say that he looked for kindness in everybody, and he was able to celebrate differences and people's, ability to, be able to, give these differences their stamp, their particular thing. And I want to be remembered also as somebody who made the grain of sand work.
Very good. Ladies and gentlemen, I hope you enjoyed this session with Jim Tuman. If you enjoyed it, tell all your friends and relatives. If you didn't enjoy it, just keep it to yourself. Thank you for joining us.
Thank you so much, everybody who's listening.
All right, very good. And then, Jim, I'm going to send you an email address where you could send pictures about yourself, etc. Okay?
I'm happy to do that, and thanks, Glenn, for giving me this opportunity. I always hope that out of these sessions, people stop and think about how important their lives are.
Very good. All right. Good meeting you, Jim. And
you
I
too.
love that.
Thanks
I
for
love how
everything,
we
Glenn.
connected through the hospital. So that's cool.
Thanks again.